Since the NBA draft is right around the corner, I thought it would be fun to look back on the biggest draft busts in the history of the Sixers franchise. To qualify, the player had to either be selected by the Sixers or trade to them on draft night. Although there is no universal way to describe a bust, the definition for this video will be a pick that failed expectations that followed being selected at the top of the draft, either by injury or straight up underperformance. Picks ranked lower on the list would be considered less of a bust than those at the top. That probably doesn't make sense now, but I hope it does later into the video. Ben Simmons.
Already, this is probably going to be the most controversial part of the list, and I got to admit that I was at a crossroads when looking at Ben's career as a Sixer. He definitely has one of the more confusing careers in terms of his rise and fall. On one hand, he is far from being considered a bust when looking at his resume. 3 All-Star teams, an All-NBA team in 2020, and 2 All-Defensive teams is a pretty successful NBA career, all things considered. I'm not comfortable labeling him as a full-blown bust because he did collect decent accolades despite his lack of commitment to the game. Don't get me wrong, Ben Simmons deserves all the flack he gets and greatly fell short of expectations. His lack of an offensive game and refusal to improve his jump shot eventually led to his demise when teams figured him out. His aggressiveness as a scorer was never where it should have been considering his size and speed, and he often became a liability to playoffs, especially against the Hawks in 2021. Ben was able to become one of the best defenders in the league, but his lack of an offensive skill set made him unplayable in high-intensity playoff games. You could say it was unfair to expect someone or anyone to become the next Magic or LeBron, but if Ben actually had a work ethic, he could have been at least what half of Magic or LeBron were, and I'm sure nobody would regret taking that type of player at the top of the draft. He is a bust in the sense that he did not live up to the hype and is probably going to retire soon, but Ben is a unique type of bust. He didn't fulfill even half of what was expected of him, yet he was still a contributing player on multiple playoff teams. The term bust is very subjective and is more layered due to the unique context of each player's career. For me, there are 3 different types of busts that you can label a player. The first and least harsh is the mini bust. Players such as Andrew Wiggins, Andrew Bogut, Karl-Anthony Towns, and Ben Simmons fall into this category due to their ability to carve out solid careers despite coming nowhere close to what we thought their potential was. Both Wiggins and Bogut were vital pieces to championship teams, and Towns made multiple All-Star teams while helping bring the Timberwolves back to relevance despite taking a backseat to Ant-Man. Ben did underperform given what he could have been as a player, but despite his lack of competitiveness and commitment, he was still capable of having a solid career. Because of that, it's only fair to put Ben at 5. Not a complete bust, but an extreme disappointment.
Noel.
It is universally accepted now that the 2013 NBA draft was one of the weaker ones in recent memory. There is no consensus number 1 pick, but Noel is consistently projected to go in the top 5 due to his impressive defensive showings at Kentucky. When he was selected by the Pelicans with the 5th overall pick and then traded to the Sixers to kick off the process, it was believed that he could turn to a DPOY caliber rim protector while having the potential to develop an offensive game. Unfortunately, it did not turn out that way, and Noel fits into my second category of bust, which is the injury bust. Concerns about his knee before the draft became legitimate in the NBA, as not only did he miss his rookie season, but he also continued to have a slew of injuries that impacted his time on the court. In his 171 games with the Sixers, put up okay numbers for a young player on a tanking team and was eventually traded in 2017 once it became clear that Joel Embiid was the center to build around. From then on, he bounced around multiple teams and continued to battle injuries. Noel is one of the more underrated what-if scenarios because he did show flashes of being one of the better rim protectors in the league, but wasn't considered to be a future superstar like Anthony Davis the year before. The 2013 draft wasn't rich in talent, but who knows what Noel could have become if he wasn't always hobbled. He was still able to play almost 500 games as a decent backup center and could have very well been a contributor to a championship team. Noel was able to stick around the NBA until last year, but he will mostly be remembered as a journeyman plagued by injury and had an underwhelming career.
Shawn Bradley.
Shawn Bradley was selected with the number 2 pick in 1993, and at 7'6" feet tall, you would think he had a season where he averaged more than 10 rebounds. You'd be wrong, this is one of the more ridiculous selections in Sixers history. For his height, Bradley played small and was never able to dominate with his length. Being on the thinner side, it was difficult for him to play with the physicality of bigger centers. His offensive game was never a threat because he couldn't move anybody. He averaged 10 points and 7 rebounds with the Sixers until eventually playing 9 seasons with the Mavericks. Bradley's career was long, and he did have some decent seasons, but did not put up the production you would like to see from someone taken second overall.
Markelle Fultz.
Fultz, who was drafted number 1 in the 2017 draft, is probably the strangest and most complex pick in Sixers history, which is impressive given all the weird shit that happened to this team. At the time, it was logical to pick him because he was a beast in college and was a perfect fit next to Embiid and Simmons. Fultz is the epitome of an injury bust. In fact, in his short time with the Sixers, he had the worst production out of anyone on this list. In only 33 games, he put up atrocious numbers, and his jump shot made Ben Simmons look like Klay Thompson. Literally nobody had no clue as to why his shot looked so out of whack, but the Sixers quickly got tired of it. He was quickly shipped to Orlando, where he has been a decent bench player ever since. Whatever happened to his shoulder, whether it was a nerve impingement, BMX bike crash, or something else, Fultz just never figured it out in Philly. He did end up finding a niche in the NBA as a slashing guard and will most likely have a solid career by role player standards. But coming into the draft, he was a consensus number 1 pick and was drawing comparisons to Steph Curry, and he obviously never came close to being 5% of what Steph was. The silver lining from the Fultz ordeal is that the Sixers got Tyrese Maxey from the trade, and Maxey filled the role that Fultz should have had, barring injury.
Evan Turner.
It was tough for me to decide who should take the throne for the biggest bust in 76ers history when comparing the final 2 players, but Evan Turner barely escapes the top bust crown. Turner was basically a poor man's Ben Simmons in the NBA. He was praised in his scouting reports for being a point forward that could handle the ball, make good passes, and use his decent athleticism to finish in the paint. In college, he did a bit of everything at an above-average level and put up impressive numbers while leading his team to the Sweet 16. Turner's game did not transition well into the pros. Nobody took him seriously as a perimeter threat, and his redeeming quality, which was his ability to drive, was less effective due to the bigger and tougher defenses in the NBA. Despite his bigger frame and tendency to barrel his way to the basket, he never shot more than 4 free throws per game in a season. He was an inefficient scorer throughout his career and was completely ineffective without the ball in his hands. The Sixers gave up on him after 3 years and he became a bench player for the rest of his career, although he barely saw playoff time when his teams made it. Turner does not have the injury excuse like Noel and Fultz, which is why I consider him much more of a bust. He just wasn't good, but not worse than number 1.
Jahlil Okafor.
Simmons was a generational prospect that flamed out but had a solid career. Noel and Fultz are mysteries caused by circumstance. Evan Turner was mediocre, but at least he survived for 10 years. Jahlil Okafor peaked in his rookie year and was out of the league at age 25. He's the third and worst type of bust to be, which is the underperformance bust. Like, come on, do I even need to say anything other than his play style became irrelevant after his rookie year? Okafor was the third center to be taken in a consecutive draft year by the Sixers and literally had no other talents other than his post moves. He was a terrible rebounder for his size and was a traffic cone defensively. The only reason he even made the all-rookie team was because he was fed the ball on a team that was intentionally trying to lose games. He was a center straight out of the 80s, but was picked in an era where bruising centers were taken advantage of. It's easy to be critical of picks in hindsight, but Okafor was so bad that he immediately became forgotten about after getting traded 50 games into his second year, and he was remembered more for beating up Celtics fans than being good in the NBA. He is a clear example of why fantastic college performances don't guarantee a successful NBA career. Analyzing the fit for a player on your team is just as, if not more important, than what their talent shows you. Anyway, thanks for sticking to the end, and leave a comment if you would change the order or add anyone else to the list. Peace.